want to talk to you now about something you and I talk about privately, which is what has become of our civilization, what has become of our work ethic, what has become of our young workers, what has become of our society.
Well, you know, when I was growing up, and I want to just get back to that for a moment because it's relevant, in this very tightly knit family and community where we all helped each other, and my Uncle Eddie was the plumbing inspector of the town. And in the middle of the night, if you had an overflowing toilet and you lived in the slum and had no money, he would get up out of bed and go and fix it for nothing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of
Try
world.
that someday.
That's the kind of world I grew up in. And you had an obligation to do that, right? And you did it not with...
Because it was the right thing to do.
It was the right thing to do, and you wanted to help someone because you cared, right? And so this is absent from modern life. And when we became so materialistic where owning the pair of sneakers or having, you know, money or owning a house or an apartment became more important to us than our relationships, things went south.
We took a bad turn.
Also, when fathers abandoned their families and went off, the sexual revolution and what happened in the 60s, there were a lot of benefits and then there were a lot of negatives. And one of the negatives is the men went off and left the women to have all the financial responsibility and the emotional responsibility, the entire responsibility of raising children by themselves. So the community is gone. Daddy's not even home. Grandparents live, you know, in a different country or across the country. There's no sense of belonging to something.
And what role did technology play in exacerbating
terrible. So the role of technology, which is an object and a material object that has taken the place of having relationships, has been a disaster. So we have an epidemic of horrifying loneliness and alienation because people are not connected to each other. They're in their own lanes, and it's every man, woman, and child for himself, right? You have to save yourself. You have to be selfish. You have to stay in your lane. You have to do all you can to survive. This is we're living in a real Hunger Games kind of culture where it's every man for himself, right? And there's no sense of camaraderie. There's no time for camaraderie. There's no feeling about sharing, giving, and things that are frankly taught in churches, temples, and religious communities. You know, those kinds of values that are taught in family life, in some kind of religious structure, are completely absent.
There is clearly, I think we will agree on this, there's clearly a new set of 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
The old 10 Commandments are gone.
Yeah.
The new 10 Commandments
are sue people, shake people down, don't do anything for anybody else.
Find a shortcut.
Find a shortcut, take as much as you can for yourself as quickly as possible. And I would say, look, corporations have contributed to this because of the downsizing and squeezing, you know, big corporations and, you know, bottom lining it, and you're basically like not an important person in that community.
Yes.
So it's a whole cultural shift that's gone on. And then when you add social media and the addiction to cell phones and how it's changing our brains and how we think, and it's creating such attention deficit disorder in this generation. Isabella, the girl that I adopted, who's my great niece, had so many problems when she came to me, cutting, depressed, suicidal, many, many problems. And I sent her to this really wonderful school, the North Country School, which is the most divine place on the planet. And you live there, it's an organic farm, you get up at 6 a.m., you shovel crap in the barn, you have a job until breakfast, you go to school all day, then you have mandatory athletics, then you have mandatory study hall, and the only time you can use a computer is when you go to the library to research things. No cell phones, no computers, you need to sit with your peers and have conversations and read and learn, but not... And speak. Very important. 2 years at that school solved all of her problems. And part of it was being away from the technology, which she was addicted to because it was her security blanket. It was the thing that she held on to, that she felt connected to something. And the fact that we have a whole generation that feels connected to an object like that, that's changing their brain, ruining their brains, is really catastrophic, because people, human beings, need social
They're
interaction.
social animals.
That's real. That's one-on-one.
And by the way, the virus that began with young people has now spread.
Yeah.
10 years ago, 5 years ago, if I had gone to a restaurant at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I would see a mom and her daughter sitting at the restaurant. The young lady would be looking at the phone.
Right.
The mother would be saying, "Get off the phone."
Right. Now the
Today-
mother's on the phone.
That's right. Now they're
And the
both
grandmother.
on. Now
Everyone.
they're both on.
Everyone's like this.
So
Try
the
taking
disease-
a subway in New York. Everyone is on their cell phone. There's no
Humanity.
this, and you need this. People need this. They need it. It's an essential part of
also-
being human.
So many people now don't reach out to others unless they need something or want something.
That's another thing.
It's transactional.
Everything.
Everything is a transaction.
Yes. And the transactional nature of all relationships is anti-human. It's inhumane.
The transaction, say it one more time.
It's the transactional nature of human relationships.
Is
It's inhumane.
In addition to it being inhumane, it's a losing strategy.
It's a losing
It doesn't
strategy.
even work.
No.
In other words, you can't
No.
even use it and say, well, it may be inhumane, but it does work. No, it doesn't. It
no.
works
It's
temporarily.
Ineffective. It's ineffective. You need to enjoy your life. You need to have friends. You need to be good to each other. You need to have camaraderie.
And
You
you need
know?
to be human.
You do. I mean, in the old days of publishing, we'd go out for long lunches. We'd make friends with each other. We'd hang out. You could actually believe what an agent said to you 30 years ago. And if they lied to you, you'd never work with them again, right? That's, I mean, there's not one word I would ever believe out of an agent's mouth today. I mean, everybody just lies, cheats, and steals like
It's become the
as a way
norm.
of life. It's just, and they're cruel and vicious and sadistic, and it's insane. This is no way to live.
Hunger game.
Hunger Games. I think our culture is Hunger Games.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, in closing, I want to ask you, now that your life has come to
Now
this
that I'm on
place-
Medicare,
That's true.
65.
There you go. But you've had such triumph. And so I'm interested in asking you, is there one thing, or maybe it's several things, but one particular thing that you regret, that you wish you had done differently because you didn't know at the time?
You know, I'd say I'm not somebody who has regrets. You know, I try to live humanely day to day. So I'm not a person who has regrets. I mean, I do think in my case, because I was running this company and I had to work so hard and I was in court all the time, I wish, and I don't think there's anything I could have done, by the way, I wish I could have had more time with my children when they were growing up. And I spent as much time as I could. But I don't resent anyone. I don't begrudge anybody anything. I really wish there had been a way to resolve my divorce, which there wasn't. We tried everything. I had a zillion judges who tried, and nobody could get him to settle it. You know, but I think that it's important that we spend time with our children. And in terms of like my son's father, who was a very difficult person, who had bipolar illness, and so we split up early on, and then he deteriorated. He was a doctor. He ended up losing everything, eventually got Parkinson's and died. At the end of his life, he actually called into the radio show I was hosting, and he had sued me for custody and tried to, I mean, it was a crazy situation, and said to me, you know, he didn't say who it was, but I knew who it was, and I hadn't spoken to him in years, right, because he really didn't have a lot to do with my son when he was growing up. But he called on Mother's Day to tell me what a great mother I was, right? I suppose I wish I had reached out to him.
So one regret might be, where possible, reconcile.
Yeah.
Well, friends, I promised you a fascinating journey, and I think it was delivered on in spades. Judith Regan is a publishing icon, but she's also a fascinating human being, and you got to know a lot about how she became this extraordinary person. I hope that you found the time together as instructive and as inspiring as I did. Judith, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.